Welcome to the Conscious Radio Network's YouTube channel. Become enlightened, have fun, and tell all your friends and family to share with everyone they know. You can find us on Facebook and stay up to date on our Facebook group, or find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Our podcasts can be found on Libsyn, iHeart, Spotify, Google Podcast, and more. Most of all, remember to go to our official website at consciousradionetwork.com for podcasts, hosts, future shows, and scheduling. We also want to welcome our international audience. Don't stop now. Enjoy the community. Subscribe today.
This is the Conscious Radio Network.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be on this spaceship we call Earth. Welcome to Conscious Radio Network's the weekly podcast series, The Seance. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Paul Mekas. If this is your first time, please click subscribe, like, share, comment, and follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Crystal healing, the science and spirituality. Our guest today has been immersed in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for nearly 30 years. As one of the leading voices in crystal healing, today he offers a unique blend of science and spirituality alongside a grounded, practical approach to working with crystals. An internationally acclaimed presenter offering classes on crystal healing, earth science, traditional Reiki, flower essence therapy, and more, both online and around the globe. The author of 8 books, including Crystal Basics, Beaming in All the Way, from Orlando. Let's welcome to the seance, Nicholas Pierce. Welcome, brother. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
You are very, very welcome, and thank you. Thank you for scheduling. This is right up my alley, because I tell you what, I've been collecting. I started collecting when I was very, very young. It's just I've been attracted to minerals and crystals and just all kinds of stuff. And how did you ultimately get into the stage that you're in now?
You know, I think the origin story for many of us who are rock lovers is the same. We started out picking up rocks as kids, and we graduated to like full-blown mineral specimens somewhere along the way. My grandfather gave me my first like proper specimen, a piece of quartz from Hot Springs, Arkansas, and suddenly this inert part of the landscape was transformed into something luminous and angular and mystical looking. Like I felt like I'd been given something precious right out of a fairy tale. And, I'm lucky enough to come from a household that was not especially religious, but really open to letting me explore. So some weeks that meant, heading to the library to learn all about earth science or environmental science or whatever I could get my hands on. I've always been kind of a science nerd. But then, other weeks it was folk tales and fairy tales. It was the lore and mythology and spiritual practices of people all around the world. And I found those two things converging, science and spirituality, most clearly in the realm of crystal healing. But I've always found it really exciting to look at how science and spirit are just two ways that humans make sense of the world around them. One through data, we like to quantify and measure things, and the other through metaphor and symbol. But it's really just about finding meaning, finding ways to understand what happens, and what our role in all these happenings are. So with crystals, I was very thankful when I went to university to work for an earth science museum on campus. That was one of those kind of randomly assigned things, as the office would have told me, but I think we know better than to just ascribe that to coincidence here. And those formative years were totally magic. It was just this amazing opportunity to be elbows deep in storage bins of world-class minerals, unusual rocks, and everything in between. And getting to compare that to my experience in the kind of metaphysical scene was really wonderful. And it's stayed with me ever since.
Yeah, it's truly a form of archaeology, and it's something I've always been in. And looking through so many different things and the beauty and the energy and that begs the next question is the energy then within all these minerals and gems and crystals and stuff like that. This is not a new thing. There's a lot of people that I still run into on a daily basis, or maybe less on a daily basis, that think this is a new age thing that's coming around. But this is, in fact, quite ancient, correct?
The human mineral connection goes back to the beginning of humankind. We have archaeological data that suggests that humans have done weird things with rocks for as long as there have been humans. A couple years back, there was a new find in the Kalahari Desert in the southern part of Africa that is like 20 plus thousand years old. That's a collection of calcite rhombohedra, these crystals of calcite that were placed in a very ancient stone shelter. Um, Archaeologists, anthropologists presume that they had some kind of spiritual or religious significance. We can't pretend to know what that is.
Yeah.
We've got a find from mainland China called the Peking Man. Those remains might be anywhere from 250 to 450,000 years old, and this individual was interred with a collection of quartz crystals, none of which were endemic to the ground in which they were buried, and they were clearly preserved with some kind of spiritual influence as well. And this was not Homo sapiens. This was Homo erectus or earlier. So, I mean, we're talking hominids that precede us have connected with crystals since the very beginning of time. There's something really reassuring about rock. It is
Yeah.
eternal. It is lasting. It is beautiful. It is useful, and it's mystical. And we are ephemeral. Our lives are so short by comparison that to hold on to something that feels like a piece of eternity seems to
Mhm.
be a very human thing.
Yeah, the amount of time it takes for these to form, for crystals to form, is it's amazing. And to hold something in your hand of such beauty, color, vibrance, and energy, it's 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 amazing. It is truly amazing. So what truly makes crystals so effective in the practice of healing?
So it all comes down to this idea of order. And, human beings are a lot less orderly at a molecular level, we'll say, but
Yeah,
also therefore at an energetic level than rocks are. A crystal is defined as a usually solid substance that has a regular composition. It's always the same ingredients, and those ingredients are arranged in a coherent, repeating, and symmetrical structure. In other words, it's very harmonious. It's the same unit, the same shape over and over again until it fills all that available space. And one thing that we know about matter is that the way things are organized influences the sort of electromagnetics involved in it.
yeah,
Most solid stuff is actually empty space, but whatever little bits are in there in a state of constant motion. And the more regularly those little bits are working together, the more regularly they are dancing, the more organized that dance might be, then we get this beautiful kind of synchronized energy field around it. And when we introduce these more coherent energy fields to less coherent energy fields like us, it offers this opportunity to learn from them. We call this process entrainment in physics, wherein two fields that are inharmonic, that are relatively alike in some ways or another, almost like exchange information and begin to sync up. And the field that always leads that conversation, the one that's always at kind of steering the ship, if you will, is
yeah.
the one that is louder, the one that has a higher amplitude. And by virtue of being more organized, crystals have this higher amplitude or this louder kind of energy field than we will ever have. So bringing that crystal, that rock, that mineral, that gem into our own field is a means of getting to that state of organization. And when we change our electromagnetic sheath, we begin to change other things about us well. Science has noted that heart brain coherence, in particular, when the electromagnetic output of those two organs are synchronized, it affects our mood, our mental affect. When those things change, it influences perception. It also influences the metabolism. It changes what's happening on
Mm.
a cellular level. And we get to a state where energy begins to transcend pathology.
Yeah. Speaking of brain waves and thought and stuff like that, you know, I keep this on my table all the time here in the studio, or if I'm studying, some sodalite helps keep the kind of like the brain waves where they're supposed to be, or kind of get the energy moving, the brain activity moving. Um, Now, the amount of there's so many different types. There's uh, so many crystals that are similar, and if somebody is trying, and there's always, it's like medicine, plant medicine. There's always something out there for somebody, and a multitude of different things for somebody. Um, and what would be the first thing that somebody would want to do that um, as far as those that come seek your help, other than your books and stuff, and we'll get into the books. As what is the first question that people ask that want to use crystals for healing?
We all come to this practice for so many different reasons. I always encourage people to kind of take a step back and think about that why in their lives, what's precipitating this conversation in the first place, and ask them to hold that in their heart, hold that in their mind, and then start to look at the options. If they've already got a crystal collection,
Mm-hmm.
as you're thinking about the why, look at the what, look at the options that are in front of you and see what steps out, what looks like it feels like it's kind of volunteering for this. If you're in the crystal shop and you're trying to select something to take home with you, to add to the toolbox, same kind of thing. We can be bombarded by all these cutesy little prescriptive um, write-ups of what crystals do, and they can be nice places to start, but they can also be super reductive. Crystals are so multidimensional that if we reduce what something does to a few short words, it's like trying to tell your whole life story in one sentence. We obviously have to leave out details. um, and since nobody can get inside your head, nobody has your lived experience, there's only one you. Nobody else is a better authority in the why that brings you to this conversation. So, the step number one is unpacking that and then seeing what resonates with you. Yeah, we can use the tools, we can use the books, we can use the little placards that might be in the crystal shops, we can look at the cute little memes that give us recommendations. But we have to really start asking ourselves the why in a deeper way, not
Yeah,
just, I want a crystal for my throat chakra for communication. Well, what's your hang up with communication? What is the real obstacle there? Because feeling like you have ideas you can't put into words is very different to feeling fear at speaking truth to power, which is also very different to, the baggage you might have if someone silenced you regularly growing up. So it's not the same crystal in all circumstances. So it's really getting clear on what's driving the need for the practice in the first place. That's where we got.
yeah, yeah. Seems like too that we've been. This just came to mind too. It seems like we've also been doing this subconsciously, all of us, for the longest time as well, as far as keeping crystals. And I mean, just look at the practice of us buying jewelry. The diamond ring for weddings. The birthstones, and using birthstones and destiny stones. What is your thought on the diamond for weddings and other traditional, sub-traditional type practices?
Oh, there's a whole lot to that. The short version is the diamond industry does a really good job of maintaining that narrative that diamonds are
Yeah.
forever, right? It's a lot of really great branding.
Yep.
It is not historically the traditional gem for this kind of thing until relatively late in human history. Diamonds are wonderful, meaningful things. I wrote an entire chapter about diamonds in my very first book because of the depth of symbolism to them, the unusual geology that's involved in their genesis, the unusual role that they play in the history of the universe, in fact. So I think they can be great metaphors for that kind of love and commitment. But I also think diamond is a really exacting teacher. And if we're not willing to meet it in its entirety, we can be surprised by what it has to offer. Of course, it doesn't do that without our conscious engagement, right? If you're not invested in that relationship with the stone, it's not going to throw lessons at you
Hmm.
unbidden, unasked for. So merely wearing a diamond engagement ring is not necessarily the same as doing the deep soul work of healing with diamond.
Yeah.
We do that through conscious partnership, and that's kind of like step two of working with crystals. Step one is why am I here, and step two is who am I working with and how can we work together, and like really investing in that relationship. It's the same as with human beings. We don't just pick someone out of a crowd and say, you're my new best friend. I've got a list of things for you to do in my life. We get to know someone. We spend time with them. We really kind of deepen the relationship from the perspective of getting together over time before we can expect them to know our intimate stuff and do that deep level of healing. So the fact that diamonds, other gems might be popular gifts doesn't take away from their potential, but merely wearing them is not a substitute for doing the work. So nobody has to worry that diamond might be too intense for them. Like, it's really about that conscious partnership.
Yeah. I've heard a couple stories of some people, friends of friends that can't wear a diamond because of the energy. They just can't have it. It's like I love it, but I can't wear it because they're very sensitive to its energy, its frequency.
Yeah, and everyone's got their own kind of energetic tastes. We all have different palettes for food. We all also have different palettes for energy. There's no moral value on liking one stone better than another or disliking another stone. Sometimes there can be, hidden wisdoms in that. We can learn to love things that were hard to love before.
Yeah.
But we're also not obligated to.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the basic ways that people can incorporate crystals into their lives?
I like to start people off very simply. Pick a stone that you love and spend time with it. That really intentionally. You don't have to call that meditation. You don't have to call that a formal healing practice. You can, if that motivates you to show up and do the work. But we can wear crystals. We can carry them. We can place them around our home. We can build grids. We could use them in elixirs by imprinting their energy on water, as long as we know how to do that safely. There definitely are some caveats in that. You can create healing layouts or use them to influence the energy of your environment. So they're really such versatile tools. The sky's the limit with how we want to work with them. So start with what's easy and accessible. If that's putting a crystal in your pocket, as long as you're doing that mindfully, you're likely to get something out of it.
Yeah, yeah. And let's dig into your not all 8 books, but that's quite a few. That's a lot of books. And so people can find you on they can buy your books on the website, theluminouspearl.com.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about your the books that you have.
Thank you. Thank you. So, the books are available everywhere books are sold. I started my publishing journey some years ago now. My very first book came out almost 7 years ago. And I really wrote that as a challenge to me. It was kind of this intellectual exercise, this set of spiritual exercises as well that took on a life of its own until I met a publisher and we clicked, and it just kind of happened really effortlessly, which is not usually how publishing goes. There's usually a little bit more work in finding that right fit. So I'm really thankful to have been able to connect with the folks at Inner Traditions Bear & Co., who've published all my works to date so far. And, what started with this one kind of really esoteric project, the 7 Archetypal Stones, has evolved into a bunch of different books, not only on crystals, but on other topics, although crystals are definitely the mainstay of my practice. And it's kind of reached its pinnacle with the release of my last 2 crystal books, Crystal Basics, which came out in 2020. It's the energetic healing and spiritual powers of 200 gemstones. And then earlier this year, its younger sibling came out, Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia. Although they sound similar, they have similar formats, but very different content. The Pocket Guide has this little quick start guide with fresh information on how to work with crystals, and portable encyclopedia of 450 rocks, minerals, fossils, gemstones, crystals, and more. And in any of my works, you're going to find an emphasis on the practical. Like, what do I do to build this relationship? How can I engage with crystals meaningfully to effect change in my life? How can I shift my focus so it's not what is this object doing for me, and toward this kind of relational state of how can we partner together to create healing, to create change and transformation? And I always have a more than moderate amount of science in there because I feel it is super helpful to understand what rocks and minerals are, to better understand how and why they work, but also so you can be a more informed consumer. If you actually know what something is, then you're less likely to fall for some of the bad bits of information that are out there, and it can help you navigate a seemingly confusing market.
Yeah. I've encountered a lot of I wouldn't say fake, you know, but there's a lot of places to go to get good quality crystals, and then there's a lot of places out there that are not so good. What are your thoughts and opinions on where's the best place to get better quality?
I'm a don't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of guy. I think every shop is going to have something lovely in there. And we have to look at a lot of factors. What determines a nice crystal in some ways is subjective. Do you like this stone? Then is it a good fit for you? That's the ultimate, litmus test. Is the price right for your budget? Could it be better elsewhere? Maybe, but we have to start with what we have access to. So I never want people to feel less than or feel shame for the tools they've got or how they got them. So we want to celebrate every doorway in. When we want to start elevating our collection, if we get to that point, we got a lot of rocks, we want to do more with it. There are objective factors that influence quality, things like provenance, where it comes from and how it got to us. That's kind of tied up in the narrative about the ethics of mining and extraction as well, which is a whole lot to like unload.
Yeah.
We can look at things like size and morphology, whether things are intact, whether they're polished or not. Polished versus rough, one is not more powerful than the other. It's personal preference, and it's also what we find aesthetic beauty in and what's useful to us. We can look at size and color saturation. We can look at associated minerals. Are there inclusions in this? Are there two minerals going together? Are there other factors involved? And, at the end of the day, I think it's way more important to know what we love and go for the things we love that are in our budget than to say, this is a good rock, this is a bad rock. I think this is a transparently labeled rock, this is a fairly priced rock, versus this is a not so transparently labeled rock, or this is something whose price is maybe not as straightforward as people would like you to believe. And even those things can be a little challenging to navigate, right? Something is worth what someone will pay for it on the one hand, and then on the other, it's not usually our shops that are intending to mislead us. It's issues with the supply chain that can mix up names or use these kind of invented trade names that have appeared out of thin air in the last couple of decades. Mm. So I strive to promote common sense education. If we know what things are geologically, we can use those names, and it takes power away from whatever links in the supply chain might be trying to mislead, intentionally or not. So find yourself a place to learn a little bit more about geology, even if it's just the tiniest bit, and it's going to help you elevate your crystal game and know what things really are and what fair prices could look like.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts on cleansing and purifying, especially when you first get them?
Yeah, this is such a foundational practice. I think it is really good to pay attention to our energetic and spiritual and psychological hygiene. That includes the tools we work with, like crystals. That includes our environment, the space where we're doing this work, where we're living and breathing and eating and sleeping, as well as anything else that might be happening where those crystals might be or where they mightn't be. So cleansing is really important, and it kind of hinges around this property that they have that's based on their structure, where crystals functionally have a kind of energetic or spiritual memory. They're like tape recorders. They're constantly recording what's happening in their environment, and that's owed to their crystal lattice. So cleansing isn't about taking out bad energy or leaving in only good. It's about achieving a blank slate. When we fill up the tape, so to speak. I know everything's digital today, but when you run out of space on your digital device, you have to get things off of the device. You have to wipe it clean so you can record more stuff. And that's essentially why we cleanse crystals. We have to give them that bandwidth to be able to do it. The other part of this is what they imprint on, what they hold on to or remember is also what they broadcast. And it's not so much that they're going to be broadcasting bad energies. I don't like to use that kind of good or bad because crystals don't put a moral judgment. They're just remembering. They're just watching. They're just listening. Instead, it's the matter of, are these energies aligned with my intention, with my goals, with my journey? And if not, let's make sure I cleanse regularly. There's no moral judgment in baking a cake and getting cake batter on your hands. You just wash your hands. Same with our crystals. They pick up stuff, so we cleanse them. And we don't have to have this obsession with purity, but they do function better. They resonate more freely and do their job better when they're regularly cared for. And so do we. So that's why we cleanse.
Yeah, and I would assume that in some of your books you would explain the proper way, which ones to do this way, because you can't just wash everything with water.
Oh, absolutely.
There's different ways for cleansing. So.
Yeah, you can do a lot of harm accidentally. Some things bleach in the sun, some can be damaged by water, some could be scratched or dehydrated by salt. There's so many if-then statements. So 3 ways that are safe for all of your crystals within reason are sound, whether that's fancy singing bowls or whether it's clapping your hands or singing. Like, use sound intentionally. Another is smoke. Whatever your favorite cleansing smoke option is, go for that. Also, if we use the breath in very intentional and meditative ways, we can effect really profound change on an energetic level. So breath is a great way to cleanse, and you'll find instructions for these and more in a lot of my books. There'll be cleansing techniques in every crystal book I've written, but each one kind of presents some different ones.
Cool. So my next question, I've been wanting to ask this for a long time, and I've never asked this on the show. So I'm going to get into the weird and the unusual, but there's never anything weird on this show. Is throughout history we've heard the stories of the crystal skulls that have been found throughout history through some of these archaeologists, and the theory is that they were brought here, and we're here to store energy, obviously, and being crystal, that they store information. What are your thoughts on that storyline about the crystal skulls and their existence?
Yeah, so actually crystal skulls are one of my areas of expertise, one of the things I've done like massive study on. And the truth is that virtually no crystal skulls have ever been discovered by an archaeologist or on a sanctioned and documented archaeological dig. There are a few well-known skulls that were purported to be ancient that very detailed analysis has proven to show that they were like 19th century reproductions, pretty much from a workshop led by a French we're going to say antiquities dealer. That's nicer than what most people would probably call him, by the name of Jean Bobin, who sold a lot of fraudulent artifacts. And then this story that the crystal skulls, that there is a collection of 13 of them that's, somehow connected to the past, the present, and the future, was invented by a white man in the 1980s and billed as a native legend, and no such legend exists. However, all that being said, throughout time, we do find images of human likeness rendered in rock and stone, as well as in quartz. We can find some fairly late examples of particularly Aztec, a few Maya carvings in hard stone. They're usually things like basalt and other materials. You can find some in greenstone, whether that's proper jade or less precious substitutes for it, and a few Aztec skulls. But these are not necessarily large carvings. They're not any of the famous ones, that there are some fairly smaller ones that we can find. But apart from that, we've got carvings in limestone from what is in the Middle East and modern day Palestine, that may be anywhere from 7,000 to 9,000 years old, that are faces, more than half of which in this, over a dozen that have been discovered are skull-like in nature. We find examples of hardstone carvings of skulls in parts of modern day Europe and Asia and Africa and throughout the Americas. So, there is this very human desire to render part of us in something that lasts longer than us. And I think part of the reason the crystal skull phenomenon exists is in continuity with this very, very ancient, almost primordial need to speak to something that is eternal. And if we look at the symbol of the skull, sure, it's the vehicle of the mind, it's the vehicle of the brain, which I think exists beyond the physical anatomy of what's involved. But it's also a symbol of our own mortality, right? Generally, while you're alive, nobody's supposed to see your skull. So we've got this image of death carved into something that doesn't die, something that might be luminous in the case of quartz or other transparent gems. And I think it's this juxtaposition of life and death, of the finite and the infinite. And in a way, they become these kind of doorways into higher consciousness. They symbolize where these opposites are being reconciled. They symbolize that threshold to what is beyond the here and now. And they can become profound tools for healing, for personal growth, for global transformation, if only we can meet them where they're at. If we get hung up on these kind of Hollywood-ified narratives, we can lose, I think, the good data that's out there. Because there's a lot of bad data.
Yeah. So let's give our audience some of your information, where they can find you, how they can get a hold of you, and we'll before we close the show, we'll touch a little bit about some of your books.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So if anyone wants to track me down, the best place to do that is via my website, which is theluminouspearl.com. Also, if you find me anywhere on social media, it's going to be at the Luminous Pearl. That's going to be Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. Admittedly, I'm most active on Instagram. I do weekly live Q&A and lots of other posts. I've got a Patreon as well for anyone who's interested, for extra content for subscribers. And if you want to track down any of my books, they're available anywhere books are sold. Of course, check out your local independent bookstores. You can order them through Barnes & Noble and Amazon and any other place that sells books also.
Cool. So yeah, I'm looking on your website here. Let's see. Yeah, Crystal Basics, 200 energetic healing and spirit and the spiritual power of 200 gemstones, crystal healing for the heart, stones of the goddess, Reiki. There's one here. What foundations? Hold on. Okay, I was on the wrong screen. Darn it, I lost it. So yeah, tell us a little bit about quickly about some of the books.
Yeah, so I've got 8 books in print right now. The most recent one, as I mentioned earlier, is Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia, a nice portable guide to 450 crystals with a quick start guide, appendices that give you lots of reference tables and glossaries and other great stuff. It's the companion to the big book that came out in 2020, which is truly big, called Crystal Basics. I've got a book on flower essences called Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden. It's about plant spirits in magical herbalism that came out in 2022 with a foreword by my friend and mentor, Christopher Penzak. I've got a whole host of other crystal books, from the 7 archetypal stones, crystal healing for the heart, stones of the goddess, and crystals for karmic healing. And last but not least, I also have a book on Reiki called Foundations of Reiki Ryoho, and it is a kind of interlineage approach, great for outreach among different traditions of Reiki, and it's a complete guide to the first and the second degree.
Wow, that is cool. Man. So even though we got a little bit more time and stuff like that, what would, let me go back here to, I love your website. This is really cool. People got to go check this out. This is really cool. You did an awesome job. Let's see. So what are some of the fundamental functions that people can employ about all crystals for healing?
Yeah, so there are these kind of 6 we'll say objectives that crystals fulfill. Any variety we're working with, they're going to do these same things. And we touched on a few of these. So the first one is they harmonize energy. They make energy more coherent, and that's owed to their own coherency. That's what that entrainment bit we talked about earlier is about. There is a side effect to this, which leads us to the next thing that crystals do. And crystals are natural amplifiers because coherent fields can be detected or can be discerned from farther away than incoherent fields. So it's not so much that crystals make us louder or project our thoughts farther. It's that when our energies, when our intentions, ideas, hopes, wishes, dreams, and goals, when they're more organized, they're going to be able to kind of cut through the noise of the universe. So that's where we get that amplification bit. The second thing that crystals do is they work a lot like prisms and lenses to reflect and refract energies. They can reflect to us what's happening under the surface. They redirect our focus. They can sharpen or maybe broaden our focus as needed to achieve the goals that we'd like to see in life. They also work like antennas, which means that they're receivers and transmitters. I had a mentor who described crystals as electromagnetic oscillators, which is a nice way to describe them as wiggling in very precise ways and a very, very real kind of way. And those precise rates at which they oscillate kind of determine the bandwidths they connect to most readily. But the thing about crystals that makes them such good antennas, if we imagine our handheld devices today, we can't see an antenna with the naked eye, but it's in there. It would have to be. If we, go back in time to the day of analog antennas, they were attached to the outside and they were quite large. They eventually shrank down. And now we use something called a fractal antenna in, our average mobile device. And it maybe has about the same surface area as your thumbnail might. But within that is packed a repeating symmetrical geometric form, not unlike a crystal lattice. And these kind of fractal antennas are the only antennas that are capable of sending and receiving on multiple wavelengths efficiently and simultaneously. So if that's what a flat fractal antenna the size of your thumbnail can do, imagine what a three-dimensional fractal antenna like a crystal can do. How many wavelengths can it send and receive on simultaneously? So that's kind of how they work like antennas. They're also excellent at storing information. We mentioned that it's the memory bit about crystals that is the reason we need to cleanse them. So essentially this happens because of tiny little point and line defects in their crystal lattices and the structures, the kind of geometrical frameworks that they're made from. There can be substitutions, there can be bends, there can be breaks, there can be things missing. So, crystals have interesting ways to reconcile that, but it often creates the opportunity for energy to move through them differently. A lot of these defects are the reason that we have colored gemstones. If we had no imperfections at all in the mineral kingdom, we'd never have an amethyst, an emerald, morganite, and aquamarine, because those are things that are derived from these kinds of defects. The other thing that those defects do is they create these little wells where packets of energy, like photons, come in and get stored and can be released later. Electrons can migrate into some of these empty vacancies. So it's like having space on a bookshelf. And so they can store these little packets of energy. We could substitute that as packets of information to be retrieved at a later time. And that's why crystals are often thought to have memory. And last but not least, one of the most important properties of crystals is their ability to translate energy or consciousness from one state to another. And quartz has several ways that it kind of demonstrates this in a physical sense, if we look at the materiality of it. So quartz has a few properties. It coheres and transforms light through optical rotation and kind of translate it from a disorganized state to a more organized state. It's also piezoelectric. If we mechanically deform its crystal structure, if we add mechanical force, it generates electrical charge, and vice versa. Anyone who wears a watch or carries a handheld device or has a clock on their wall, chances are the reason its timekeeping functions work is from a tiny little sliver of quartz which gets zapped by the energy source and it begins to oscillate or wiggle. So it's converting the electrical energy into kinetic energy, mechanical energy, and translating it from one state to another. So we call this process transduction. And it works metaphysically by transducing our consciousness, our intentions, our goals into the language that the universe speaks. So crystals kind of become the intermediary. And when we put all these things together, they're able to harmonize those intentions or energies. They're able to reflect and redirect them as needed so we can refine them. They are like antennas that transmit them out into the universe because they can store them, and simultaneously they're going to have that ability to translate them into that vibrational code that the universe understands, even if we don't. And that's how they create change in our lives.
Wow. Very well said. Are you up to any new projects? Another book?
Always.
Lab time?
Yeah, I've always got something in the works. I'm in the final stages of submission of my 9th book with my publisher. I have a couple other projects in the works as well that it's still too early for me to reveal much about, but I will be doing some different things with some different publishers as well. And then I'm always teaching. So I keep a really rigorous schedule of events online and in person, whether they're workshops, weekend seminars, conference presentations. So it's kind of winding down for the year. I've got some great things scheduled with one of my favorite venues, the College of Psychic Studies in London. We do some online classes together, and every so often we do some in-person stuff when I'm over there. So if anyone's interested in seeing what my upcoming projects will be, whether those are books or classes or anything else, you can find that on my social media or on my website.
Yeah. And we have quite a bit of an audience in the UK as well, through the YouTube channel and through our regular podcast outlet. So if anybody's listening from the UK, stay tuned, especially for next year. So as far as this episode will be around the springtime and stuff, just before the springtime. Do you have anything going on in the springtime for next year?
So I'm still working on the calendar that far out. I do have things, nothing I can announce at this point, but by the time the episode airs, I will have updates on my website, on my social media, so people will be able to stay abreast of what's coming up.
Cool. Yeah, and definitely let me know, and that way I can plug some of that extra information into the stuff that we publish.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Now, as far as the closing of the show, what do you have as a takeaway for our audience today?
I think one of the most important takeaways we've got in working with crystals is that, one, we're never alone, right? Rock is everywhere. You can look around your room right now, and even if you don't have a collection of crystals, you are still surrounded by mineral resources. The concrete in the foundation, the gypsum in the plasterboard in the walls, the glass is made out of mineral resources. All of your devices are made out of mineral resources. So we are surrounded by crystals and crystal adjacent things. And they're always there to support us. We also can't get away from the field of the earth. We got to go pretty far off the planet to not have access to that crystalline energy that's coursing through us at every moment. The other big takeaway that I think the Mineral Kingdom provides for me is to slow down. Like, we really enter into relationship with stone when we stop trying to be so busy with them and just start allowing. And that's a really big change in my own practice. And I think it's really helpful when we live in a really chaotic world to learn to surrender.
Yeah. Surrender and submit. Definitely. Awesome. Nicholas, Tumbled, namaste, my friend. Thank you for joining us today, and keep us, keep me updated on ongoing projects. And for those who want to read his books, go find his books. Go to theluminous.pearl.com, and they can find you on Facebook or Instagram at The Luminous Pearl. Other than that, should I call you Nick or Nicholas?
Nicholas, please.
Nicholas? No problem, brother. No problem. Thank you, Nicholas. You have yourself a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You are very, very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. And until next week, we will see you then.